What happens after you kill a monster for the third time? When you felt its cold heart stop beating in your arms, not once, but thrice. What do you cling to when you wake up in its dungeon? And the only thing more terrifying than its smile is the ancient secret it knows about your own blood. If your very life was the key to destroying him, but also the reason for your eternal torment, what would your first move be? Share your strategy in the comments. Elara had killed him 3 times. The first time, in the rain-lashed courtyard of his forgotten castle, she had plunged a stake of polished hawthorn into his chest. She remembered the sound, not a tear, but a dry, splintering crunch, like stepping on a long-dead branch. His eyes, pools of molten amber, had widened in genuine surprise before the light within them guttered out. He had died in her arms, his body astonishingly light, like a husk emptied of its terrible harvest. The second time, amidst the crumbling splendor of his ballroom, she had drawn a silver-edged dagger across his throat. The metal had sizzled against his unnatural flesh, and the scent of burnt ozone and old roses had filled the air. He had crumpled soundlessly, his fine velvet doublet soaking up the dark, ichorous blood that seeped from the wound. He had died in her arms again, a mockery of a lover's embrace. The third time, just 3 nights ago. She had cornered him in the crypts, the air thick with the dust of his own kind. She had unstopped a vial of water blessed by a saint whose name was lost to all but the most ancient of texts. A single drop on his brow had smoked and hissed, etching a furrow of holy fire across his alabaster skin. He had screamed then, a sound that held less pain and more profound, cosmic offense, before slumping against a sarcophagus. She had caught him, her old bones groaning with the effort, and he had died in her arms for the final time. She was sure of it. She had felt the stillness settle over the land. She had felt the weight of 68 years of hunting, of loss, of a life defined by the moon's pale, watchful eye, finally, blessedly lift. She was a fool. Elara woke on a bed of damp, rotten straw. The air was a physical presence, cold and heavy, carrying the sense of wet stone, old iron, and something faintly sweet and corrupt. It was a smell she knew well, the breath of a deep place, a place forgotten by the sun. A single, guttering torch in a sconce outside her cell cast long, leaping shadows that danced like devils on the wet, hewn rock walls. Her body ached with a profound weariness that went beyond muscle and bone. It was a weariness of the soul. She pushed herself up, her joints protesting with sharp, familiar pains. The cell was small, barely 5 paces across, with a heavy oak door banded in black iron. There was no window, only a narrow slit high up in the wall for air. And then he was there. He stood beyond the bars, a figure woven from the shadows themselves. Valerius. He looked exactly as he had the moment before the holy water had touched him, impeccable, ageless, his dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on a forgotten Roman coin. There was no mark on his brow, no tear at his fine, dark robes, but it was his smile that stopped the breath in Elara's lungs. It wasn't a grin of triumph, not the fierce, sharp-toothed bearing of a predator. It was a small, knowing, almost gentle curve of his lips, a scholar's smile, upon discovering a long-sought-after truth. 3 times. His voice was smooth, a low caress that slithered through the bars and coiled in the cold air of the cell. You were admirably thorough. Elara said nothing. She pushed herself to her feet, her spine straightening with a lifetime of ingrained defiance. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her despair. You are wondering, of course, Valerius continued, stepping closer to the bars. His presence seemed to suck the warmth from the very air. Steak, silver, holy water, the sacred trinity. It should have been enough. It was enough. He tilted his head, his amber eyes tracing the lines of her face, the tremor she could not quite hide in her hands. For any other of my kind, but I am not like the others, Elara. You should have studied your prey more closely. What are you? She finally managed, her voice a dry rasp. A collector, he said simply, a connoisseur of lost things. And you, my dear hunter, are a walking, breathing relic, a living tomb for a secret I thought was lost to the ages. He gestured languidly towards her. "The blood that runs in your veins, old woman, it is not merely human. It is a recipe, a covenant, the last echo of the sun's first tear." The name meant nothing to her. It sounded like a child's fairy tale. She shook her head, a sharp, dismissive motion. "Of course, you do not know the name," he murmured, as if reading her thoughts. "It was scrubbed from the world by those who feared its power, a blessing placed in the bloodline of a few, to be a final safeguard against the endless night. My night." His smile widened just a fraction. "It is why your methods worked, but never held. You could strike me down with the power your blood unknowingly lent to your tools, but you could not unmake me, not without understanding the key you carried within you all along." The horror began to dawn on Elara, cold and slow, seeping into her like the dungeon's damp. It wasn't just her skill or her will that had made her a hunter. It was an accident of birth, a curse she never knew she carried. "And so," Valerius said, his voice dropping to intimate whisper, "we begin our new arrangement. You are no longer the hunter at my gate. You are the flask that holds the last vintage of a divine poison, and I will be the sommelier." The cell door opened without a sound. He moved with an unnatural grace, flowing into the space before she could react. His cold hands, strong as iron, took hold of her arms. She struggled, of course. She was Elara, the witch hunter who had felled a dozen of his children, but against his true strength. Her efforts were those of a sparrow in a gale. He didn't lunge. He didn't snarl. He was ritualistic, precise. He tilted her head to the side, his thumb brushing a strand of her gray hair from her neck. His breath was cold against her skin. "The first tasting," he whispered. "The pain was not the worst of it. It was sharp and piercing. Yes, a twin fire where his fangs broke her skin. But worse was the feeling that followed, a slow, siphoning pull, a vital warmth leaving her body, drawn out into the void of him. It was not just blood he took. It was a piece of her memory, a fragment of her strength, a drop of the ancient magic woven into her very essence. She saw flashes behind her eyes, Kaelin's smile, the way the sunlight caught his hair on the morning he died. It felt as if Valerius was drinking that, too. As quickly as it began, it was over. He released her, and she stumbled back, collapsing onto the foul straw. A single, perfect drop of blood welled on his lower lip. He did not lick it away. He savored it, his eyes closed in profound concentration. "Ah!" he breathed, a sound of pure, ecstatic revelation. There it is, the faintest note of sunlight on the edge of oblivion. He looked down at her, his expression one of almost paternal satisfaction. "Rest, Elara. Your blood needs time to replenish the vintage. We have all the time in the world." He left, the door closing with a soft, final click. Elara lay on the cold stone, the phantom cold of his touch still on her neck, the echo of his words in her mind. The sun's first tear. She brought a trembling hand to the twin punctures on her neck. They were real. This was not a dream. The hunter was now the cattle. The weapon was now the prize. In the profound silence of the dungeon, with only the drip-drip of distant water for company, Elara did the only thing she had left. She retreated inward. She closed her eyes, shutting out the grim reality of the stone and the iron, and she reached for the one thing Valerius could not steal from her, not completely. She reached for the memory of Kaelin. She clung to the ghost of her husband's smile, a flicker of warmth in the endless, growing dark. The darkness in the dungeon was not absolute, but it was patient. It waited in the corners, retreating only grudgingly when the guard, a young, sneering vampire named Kael, made his rounds to replace the guttering torch. With the flickering light came a fleeting warmth, but it was the cold that was the true resident of Elara's cell. It seeped into her bones, a constant companion to the new, dull ache that had taken root in her neck. 3 days. What was it for? Time had become a syrupy, meaningless trickle, measured only by the gnawing emptiness in her stomach and the scheduled horror of Valerius's visits. Each night he came. Each night, the same silent, precise ritual. The cold hands, the unbearable intimacy of his grip, the piercing pain, and then the slow, draining pull that left her weaker, thinner, as if she were being hollowed out from the inside. She had stopped struggling after the second time. It was a waste of precious energy. Instead, she employed a different tactic. She built a fortress in her mind, stone by stone, as Valerius drank. She focused on the feel of the rough, damp stone beneath her palms, the sound of her own ragged breath, the distant, almost rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water. She made her mind small, hard, impregnable thing. Today, after Kale had shoved a wooden bowl of thin, tasteless gruel through a slot in the door, he lingered. He was a stark contrast to Valerius, all sharp angles, restless energy, and a cruelty that was petty and immediate. Not so proud now, are we, Hunter? His voice was a taunt, designed to provoke. Elara did not look at him. She sat with her back against the wall, slowly spooning the gruel into her mouth. It was fuel, nothing more. The great Elara, Kale continued, leaning against the bars. The stories they told about you. How you tracked my kind through blizzards. How you beheaded the Baron of the Blackwood in his own bed. And now, you're just an old wineskin, waiting for my lord to have his fill. She finished the gruel and set the bowl down carefully. She could feel his eyes on her, hungry for a reaction. She gave him none. Silence, she was learning, was a weapon they were not accustomed to. Their world was one of grand pronouncements and ancient dramas. Her quiet endurance was an anomaly. Does it hurt? He pressed, his voice dropping to a malicious whisper. When he drinks, they say it's an ecstasy for mortals, that you beg for it. That was when Elara lifted her head. Her eyes, pale and fierce in the torchlight, met his. Does it hurt? She asked, her voice low but clear. To be his dog, sent to yap at his prisoner? Tell me, do you get the dregs? The leftovers he doesn't want. Kale's smug expression vanished, replaced by a flash of pure fury. He straightened up, his hand gripping the bar so tightly the iron seemed to groan. For a moment, she thought he might unlock the door and try to kill her, but he controlled himself, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Valerius had given strict orders. She was not to be harmed beyond necessary. Enjoy your silence, old woman. He spat. It will be broken soon enough. He stalked away, his footsteps echoing sharply in the corridor. The small victory was fleeting, but it was real. She had gotten under his skin. It was a reminder that they were not monolithic. They had tempers, insecurities, hierarchies. It was information. It was a potential crack. When he was gone, the true battle began. The physical weakness was a tide, and she felt it rising. Her hands trembled slightly. A deep, bone-chill fatigue made her want to curl up on the straw and never rise. This was when the memories came, not as a comfort, but as a lifeline. She closed her eyes and let the fortress walls down. She deliberately reached for the past, for a time before the cold and the dark. The memory came, warm and vivid. She was not 68. She was 20, maybe 21. Her body strong and supple, her hands smooth and unlined. She was in a sun-drenched meadow at the edge of a great forest, the air humming with insects and thick with the scent of clover and warm earth. Kalen was there, lying on his back beside her, a blade of grass between his teeth. His hair was the color of wheat, and his laughter was a sound that seemed to make the very sunlight brighter. "You're too serious, Elara," he had said, turning his head to look at her. His eyes, the color of a summer sky, crinkled at the corners. "Someone has to be," she had retorted, but a smile was tugging at her own lips. "You'd charge into a goblin nest with a butter knife if you thought it was a grand adventure. And you'd spend 3 days drawing a map of the nest, studying their feeding patterns, and poisoning their stew pot." He laughed. "That's why we're a good team. My fire, your focus." He sat up, his expression softening. "It's not just about the hunt, you know. It's about this." He gestured around them, at the sun, the sky, the field. "It's about preserving moments of peace, so that ordinary people can have days like this, without fear." He leaned over and kissed her then, and the taste of him was of sunshine and wild grass. It was a promise, a future. The memory faded, leaving a phantom warmth on her skin and a sharp, physical ache in her chest. The contrast with her present reality was so brutal, it was almost funny. The sun-drenched meadow was now a dripping dungeon. The man who spoke of preserving peace was decades in his grave. Killed by the very darkness, she now served as a living larder. But the memory had done its work. The trembling in her hands had stilled. The crushing fatigue was pushed back, not gone, but held at bay. Kaelin's words echoed in her mind. "My fire, your focus." Her fire was guttering, low and dim. But her focus? That was a whetstone she had been sharpening her entire life. Valerius thought he was studying her, unraveling her blood. But she was studying him. She was studying his servants' tempers, the rhythms of the dungeon, the weaknesses in her own body and spirit. She was a prisoner, yes. A source of blood, yes. But she was still Elara. And Elara, the hunter, was beginning to map her new, terrible territory. The hunt was not over. It had simply changed form. It was now a hunt for a way out, for a flaw in her captor's grand design, for a single, crucial mistake. She looked towards the door, towards the fading torchlight. The scent of iron was strong, but stronger still was the scent of memory and the resolve it carried. The world outside the dungeon's oppressive stone embrace did not stand still. While Elara fought her war of silence and memory, another battle was beginning, one of desperation and dwindling hope, under a sky she had feared she would never see again. Finn's boots crunched on the gravel of the path leading to the village of Oakhaven, the last place Elara's trail had been seen. The air here was clean, scented with pine smoke and baking bread, a stark, almost offensive contrast to the turmoil churning in his gut. He was a man of 35, with the lean, weathered look of one who spent more time on the road than by a hearth. His eyes, a sharp and worried green, scanned the familiar, hateful sign of the bloodied stag inn. It was here, a month ago. She had bought him an ale, clapped him on the shoulder with a hand that could crack a walnut, and told him she'd be back in a week. "One last hunt, Finn," she'd said, her own eyes, the color of a winter sky, holding a grim finality he'd been too foolish to recognize. An old debt. It's time it was paid. He should have followed her then. He should have insisted. But you didn't insist with Elara. She was a force of nature, his mentor. The closest thing to a mother he'd had since his own had been taken by the festering things that lurked in the dark. Her will was iron, and her silence, when she chose it, was a wall. Now, pushing open the creaking door to the inn, that silence felt like a tomb. The innkeeper, a burly man named Gregor with a beard like a thorn bush, looked up from wiping a tankard. His friendly expression faltered when he saw Finn. "She's not back then?" Gregor asked, his voice low. Finn didn't trust himself to speak. He just shook his head, sliding onto a stool at the bar. "I told her," Gregor muttered, leaning forward, his breath smelling of stale beer and regret. "I told her not to go up to that place. Blackwood Keep. It's wrong. Animals won't go near it. Birds don't fly over it. It's been that way for generations." Blackwood Keep. The name was a shard of ice in Finn's heart. The lair of Valerius. The stories about that vampire lord were older than the oldest trees in this forest, whispered to scare children and sober drunkards. Elara had spoken of him only once, her voice stripped of all emotion, the night they'd buried Kaelin. "He has a ledger," she'd said, "and one day I will ensure it is balanced." "Did anyone see anything?" Finn's voice was rough. "Hear anything? A fight? Light in the sky?" Gregor shook his head, his eyes avoiding Finn's. "Nothing. Old man Hemlock, who lives at the forest's edge, said he heard a strange sound that night. Like a great sigh, he said. But he's half mad, drinks his own moonshine. No one else saw a thing. It's like the mist swallowed her." The hopelessness in the man's tone was a physical weight. The village had already written her off. Another fool who challenged the dark and was consumed by it. They would tell stories about her now, too. A cautionary tale to be shared over winter fires. But Finn was not a villager. He was a hunter, trained by the best. And hunters did not give up on their own. He spent the next 2 days asking questions. His inquiries met with shrugged shoulders, averted gazes, and superstitious gestures. The people of Oakhaven had built their lives around ignoring the blight on their doorstep. They would not help him tear the scab off that old wound. On the third day, standing at the edge of the vast, brooding forest that separated the village from the looming peaks where Blackwood Keep was said to reside, Finn felt the first true tendril of despair wrap around his throat. To go in there alone was suicide. He was good, but he was not Elara. And if she had fallen, what chance did he have? It was then that the memory surfaced, a fragment from his training. Elara's voice, calm and instructive. When the path is dark, Finn, and the maps are blank, seek the scribes of the old world. The answers to our present monsters are often buried in the dust of the past. The scribes of the old world. There was one place, a rumor really, a monastery nestled in the high, lonely crags of the sunken mountains, a place untouched by the politics of kings and the fears of common men. The brothers were said to be collectors, guardians of forgotten lore. They were said to know the true names of things that went bump in the night. It was a thin reed of hope, but it was all he had. The journey to the sunken mountains took a week of hard riding, then 2 days of even harder climbing on foot. The air grew thin and cold, and the world fell away below him. Finally he saw it, a structure of pale, withered stone, built into the very face of the mountain as if grown from it. It was the monastery of St. Ignatius, a place of silence and stone. He was met at the heavy, iron-studded door by a monk whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes as clear and peaceful as a mountain lake. He introduced himself as Brother Anselm. "We do not often have visitors from the lowlands," Anselm said, his voice soft as the wind through the pines. "You seek knowledge." It was not a question. Finn, grimy and exhausted, simply nodded. "I seek a hunter named Elara, and I seek knowledge of a vampire lord called Valerius." A shadow passed behind Brother Anselm's calm eyes. "Ah," he breathed, "the Lord of Blackwood, and the keeper of the first tier. Come, you will speak with Baba Ignatius. He is the only one who remembers those old stories now." He was led through silent, cloistered walkways, past monks who moved like ghosts, their prayers a whispered hum in the stillness. They entered a small, circular room, its walls lined with books and scrolls, so ancient the air tasted of parchment and time. Sitting in a simple wooden chair, by a window overlooking the vast expanse of the world, was a man so old he seemed to be made of the same parchment and dust as his books. This was Baba Ignatius. His eyes, milky with cataracts, turned towards Finn as he entered. Yet, Finn had the unnerving feeling the old man could see right through him, down to the very fear in his soul. "Elara," Finn began, his voice cracking. "She went to kill Valerius. She never returned." Baba Ignatius nodded slowly, his gnarled fingers steepled. "To kill Valerius is not like killing other beasts of the night, my son. He is anchored by an ancient magic, a paradox." "The sun's first tear," Finn whispered, repeating the name Valerius had hissed at Elara. The old man's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You know the name?" "Few do. It was a blessing woven into the bloodline of a sacred family, a final, desperate weapon against the eternal dark. It is a poison to his kind, a sacred light, but it is also a lure. He has sought its source for centuries." Finn's blood ran cold. "Elara, her blood?" "Is the last vessel," Baba Ignatius confirmed, his voice heavy with sorrow. "He would not kill her, not while her heart still pumps that divine poison. He will keep her. He will study her, drain her slowly, to unravel the secret and make himself immune, or to distill its power for his own use." The horror of it unfolded in Finn's mind, more terrible than any simple death. Elara proud, fierce Elara, reduced to a caged thing, a resource to be mined. "How do I save her?" Finn's voice was raw. "How do I kill him?" Baba Ignatius gestured to the shelves groaning with books. "The answer lies here, in the genealogy of the cursed and the blessed. We must find the origin of the tear. We must understand the nature of the cage before we can pick its lock. The journey ahead, Finn, is not one of strength, but of understanding, and understanding takes time." He paused, his sightless eyes seeming to peer into a great distance. Time, I fear, is the one thing your mentor may not have. The darkness in the dungeon had begun to speak, not in words at first, but in textures. The constant drip, drip, drip from the ceiling had a different timbre depending on the time. A hollow plink when the torches were fresh, a thick, sluggish tap when they guttered low. The scurrying of unseen things in the walls had patterns. Elara, with nothing but time and a hunter's mind, was learning its language. It was during one of Valerius's visits, as the vampire lord finished his tasting, with that same look of rapturous concentration, that Elara heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not a drip, not a scuttle. A sigh. A long, weary exhalation that seemed to come from the stone itself, from the wall opposite her cell. Valerius's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. He had heard it too. For a fleeting second, his mask of cool control slipped, revealing a flicker of annoyance. It was there and gone, so fast she might have imagined it, but she knew she hadn't. "It seems you have a neighbor, Elara," he said, his voice regaining its smooth composure. He wiped his lips with a silk handkerchief. "Do not entertain hopes of camaraderie. The things I keep down here are not for company." He left, and the silence he left behind was different. It was pregnant. Listening. Hours passed, marked only by the fading of the torchlight. Elara sat against the wall, her body aching with a familiar, drained weakness. She focused on the opposite wall, a patchwork of rough-hewn stone and weeping damp. "Hello," she whispered, her voice a dry croak, barely audible. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then a voice, so faint it was like the rustle of dead leaves, answered. "He's wrong, you know. You are not the only prize in his collection." The voice was ancient, genderless, stripped of all passion. It was the voice of the dungeon itself. "Who are you?" Elara asked, pressing her ear closer to the cold bars. "A footnote," the voice rasped. "A relic of a war that was old when Valerius was still a mortal man, burning with ambition. He keeps me for nostalgia's sake, and for the things I know." "What do you know?" Hope, a dangerous and fragile thing, began to flutter in her chest. "I know that the sun's first tear was not a gift. It was a curse, a mutually assured destruction. The family it was bound to was meant to be its guardians, its secret keepers, not its wielders." There was a dry, rattling sound that might have been a laugh. "Valerius believes he can reverse engineer a blessing. He is a fool. He is trying to drink the ocean to understand its salt." Elara's mind raced. This changed everything. "How do you know this?" "Because," the voice whispered, "my ancestor was the sorcerer who helped weave that bloodline. We were the architects. And Valerius, he was our first and greatest failure." Before Elara could process this, the heavy tread of boots echoed down the corridor. It was not Kale's restless stride. This was slower, more deliberate. A different vampire appeared outside her cell, a female, with hair the color of spilled ink and eyes that held a cold, clinical intelligence. This was Morana. She didn't speak. She simply unlocked the door and gestured for Elara to come out. There was no point in resisting. Elara rose, her legs unsteady, and followed. Morana led her not to Valerius's chambers, but to a different part of the dungeon, a room that made Elara's blood run colder than the stones. It was a laboratory. Shelves lined with glass jars containing unnameable things floated in murky liquids. Bunsen burners fueled by a pale, blue flame licked at the bottoms of crucibles. The air was thick with the cloying scent of rare herbs, chemical preservatives, and something metallic and coppery. "The Lord Valerius requires a more detailed analysis," Morana said, her voice as crisp and dry as a pressed flower. She gestured to a stone slab table in the center of the room. "Lie down." This was a new level of violation. Valerius drank her memories with her blood. Morana would dissect her magic with tools. As Elara lay on the cold slab, Morana moved with an efficient, dispassionate grace. She didn't look at Elara as a person, but as a fascinating specimen. She took vials of blood, noting the color and viscosity. She pricked Elara's finger, smearing the blood on a glass slide to examine under a strange, crystalline lens that magnified things with impossible clarity. The concentration fluctuates, Morana murmured to herself, making notes on a parchment. Stress, perhaps, or memory. The Lord believes it is tied to emotional resonance, a poetic, if unscientific, notion. She then produced a series of dried herbs and rare minerals, holding them near Elara's skin and watching for a reaction. A piece of crushed moon petal made the veins in Elara's wrist throb with a faint, silvery light. A dusting of powdered obsidian caused a wave of nausea, so intense Elara nearly retched. Fascinating, Morana whispered, her eyes gleaming with pure, academic curiosity. The magic is not inert. It is defensive, reactive. Throughout the ordeal, Elara said nothing. She rebuilt her mental fortress, stone by stone. But she watched. She noted the way Morana's hands moved, the items she prized, the way her eyes lit up at a particular reaction. This vampire was not driven by sadism like Kale, or grand ambition like Valerius. She was driven by knowledge, and that made her both terrifying and, potentially, predictable. When Morana was finished, she led Elara back to her cell. As she locked the door, she paused, her clinical gaze falling on Elara. "Your resilience is notable," Morana said, a statement of fact, not a compliment. It will be interesting to see how long it lasts. As her footsteps receded, Elara slumped against the wall, physically and mentally exhausted. But her mind was churning. She had a neighbor, an ally perhaps, from the very origin of her curse. And she had a new enemy, one who saw her not as a person, but as a complex and intriguing puzzle. She looked towards the wall from which the whisper had come. "Architect," she whispered into the darkness. "What is your name?" The answer came, slow and deliberate. "Silas." A name. It was a start. It was a weapon. The visits became a dreadful rhythm. Valerius with his cold, intimate siphoning. Morana with her clinical, violating examinations. Kale with his petty, predictable taunts. Elara endured them all. A silent stone in a dark river. But a stone, given enough pressure, can be used to sharpen a blade. Her body was a map of her captivity. The twin punctures on her neck were a permanent, tender mark. Her arms were dotted with the faint bruises from Morana's needles. The deep, soul-deep weariness was a constant companion. Yet, within the hollowed-out shell of herself, a new resolve was crystallizing. The whisper from the wall, Silas, had given her a sliver of leverage, a piece of the board she had not known existed. It was time to test its strength. The opportunity came during Valerius's next visit. He flowed into her cell as usual, his presence a wave of preternatural cold. But this time, as his hands reached for her, Elara did not simply brace herself. She spoke, her voice low but clear, cutting through the ritualistic silence. "He begged for his life, you know." Valerius froze. His hands, inches from her arms, hovered in the air. The silence in the cell became absolute, thick enough to choke on. "What did you say?" His voice was dangerously soft. "Kalen," Elara continued, her winter sky eyes locked on his amber ones. She poured every ounce of her wool into keeping her voice flat, factual, a historian recounting a minor, unpleasant detail. "My husband, on his knees in the mud. You stood over him, and he looked at you not as a monster, but as a man. He begged. For me, for the child we might have had." She saw it, a flicker in the depths of his eyes. Not anger, not yet. It was irritation, the annoyance of a scholar interrupted by a trivial, distasteful noise. He preferred his narrative of grand, cosmic conflict. This was messy. This was human. "He was weak," Valerius stated, his voice regaining its composure, but a new, sharp edge beneath it. His blood was common. It held no interest for me. "Is that why you tore his throat out?" Elara pressed, taking a small, deliberate step forward, forcing him to look down at her, to silence his common, begging voice. Or was it because his humanity, his simple, mortal love, was something you could never understand, never possess, and so you had to destroy it? That struck a nerve. His lip curled, the ghost of a snarl. You dare to psychoanalyze me, immortal? You who are but a vessel. I am the memory of the man you murdered, she fired back, her voice gaining a razor's edge. And every time you drink from me, you drink that memory. You taste his blood on my lips. You swallow his name, Kalen. She spat the name at him like a weapon. For a breathtaking second, Valerius's mask of icy control shattered. A raw, primal fury contorted his features. His hand snapped out, not to hold her, but to strike. The back of his hand connected with her cheek, with a crack that echoed in the small cell. The force of it sent Elara stumbling back against the wall, her vision blooming with white stars. Pain, hot and sharp, flared across her face. But inside she was exultant. He lost control. The untouchable, ancient lord had been provoked into a petty, human act of violence by the ghost of a mortal man. He stood over her, breathing heavily, his fists clenched. The civilized veneer was gone, revealing the ancient predator beneath. You will learn your place, vessel. My place, Elara said, tasting blood in her mouth from a split lip, is to be the thorn in your side for as long as I draw breath. You can drink my blood, Valerius, but you will never digest my hate. He stared at her, a maelstrom of rage and something else, a flicker of cold, calculating reassessment in his eyes. Without another word, he turned and stormed from the cell, the door slamming shut with a force that shook the very stones. Elara slid down the wall, clutching her throbbing cheek. The pain was a badge of honor. She had drawn blood, not with a blade, but with a memory. She had found a crack in his armor. The victory was small, but its echo was loud. When Kale came later with her gruel, he noticed the fresh bruise blooming on her face. A slow, ugly smile spread across his lips. Had a disagreement with the master, did we? He sneered, shoving the bowl through the slot. You'll learn. This time, Elara did not remain silent. As he turned to leave, she spoke, her voice calm but carrying. He fears you, you know. Kale stopped dead in his tracks. He turned slowly, his expression a mixture of confusion and intrigue. What? Valerius, Elara said, meeting his gaze. He sees your ambition, your hunger. It's not like Lysander's blind loyalty or Morana's cold curiosity. Yours is a fire he cannot control, and it makes him nervous. She saw the thought take root in Kale's mind. His eyes widened slightly, the sneer replaced by a look of dawning, avaricious consideration. He said nothing, but the silence was more telling than any retort. He turned and walked away, his steps slower, more thoughtful. Alone again, Elara allowed herself a small, grim smile. She had thrown 2 stones into the stagnant pond of the castle's hierarchy. She had provoked the master and planted a seed of discord in the servant. It was a dangerous game. Valerius's rage could now turn truly vicious. Kale's ambition could make him a more unpredictable enemy. But for the first time since she'd awoken in this cell, she was no longer just reacting. She was acting. The hunter was back on the hunt, and her quarry was no longer just a vampire, but the very structure of her prison. The spark had been lit. Now, she had to nurture it into a flame. The air in Baba Ignatius's study was thick with the dust of centuries and the weight of terrible truths. Finn felt the hope that had carried him up the mountain curdle in his stomach, replaced by a cold, leaden dread, a living larder. The image of Elara, fierce and indomitable Elara, kept in a cage and periodically drained, was a profanity that made him want to roar, to break something. Then there's no time, Finn said, his voice tight. I have to go. Now, I'll burn that castle to the ground around him. Baba Ignatius did not move. His milky, unseeing eyes seemed to hold a universe of patience. And how will you enter Blackwood Keep, son? The forest itself is a sentinel, twisted by his will. The stone walls are woven with spells that turn minds to madness and hearts to ice. You would be dead before you saw the main gate, and your mentor would be no closer to freedom. Finn slumped into a wooden chair, the fight draining out of him. The old man was right. He was charging at a fortified mountain with a teaspoon. Then what? What is this? Son's first tier? If it's a weapon, how do I use it? It is not a sword you can simply wield, the old monk said, his gnarled fingers tracing the embossed leather cover of a tome on the table between them. It is a key, and a lock, a paradox, as I said. He opened the book, its pages crackling with age, revealing intricate illustrations of celestial bodies and twisting genealogical lines. Centuries ago, Ignatius began, his voice taking on the rhythm of a storyteller. A cabal of seers foresaw the rise of a vampire line so potent it would threaten to eclipse the sun itself. They could not destroy it, for its roots were already too deep in the world's magic. So they crafted a failsafe, a blessing of such pure, concentrated sunlight that it could unmake the very essence of such a creature. He turned a page, pointing to a beautiful, stylized painting of a woman weeping a single glowing tear. They bound this essence, the sun's first tear, not into an object, but into a bloodline, a single family, chosen to be its silent, unknowing guardians. It was a dormant weapon, activated only by the presence of the specific vampiric curse it was created to destroy. Finn leaned forward, his mind racing. Valerius's curse. Precisely. When one of the bloodline comes of age near him, the tear awakens in their blood. It is what made Elara such a potent hunter. It guided her hand, strengthened her weapons, but also made her a beacon to him. The old man's face was grim. He does not just want to remove the threat. He wants to understand it, to consume it, to become a god who has ingested his own only weakness. The bloodline. Finn whispered, a horrifying thought dawning. Elara, did she have any children? Baba Ignatius shook his head slowly. The records show the line was thin always. Her parents were killed by ghouls when she was young. Her husband, Kalin, fell to Valerius. The tear, it is a burden that often leads to solitude, a price for its power. The tragic, cruel symmetry of it all threatened to overwhelm Finn. Elara had spent her life avenging her husband, unknowingly powered by the very thing that made her the ultimate target of his killer. So, I cannot use the tear myself, Finn concluded, the realization a bitter pill. No, but you can understand the cage. The lore suggests the tear's power is tied to emotion, to memory. It is not a chemical to be distilled. It is a story written in blood. Valerius's approach is a scientist trying to measure a ghost. The old man closed the book with a soft thud. Your path is not to the castle, not yet. It is to find a way through the forest. You need a guide who knows its twisted paths. And where would I find such a guide? Finn asked, desperation creeping back into his voice. Baba Ignatius gestured towards the window, towards the vast, brooding expanse of the Blackwood. The forest has its own inhabitants. Not all are under his thrall. The Koriks remember. The crows. Koriks, the old man corrected. They are more than birds. They are watchers, gossips. They have seen empires rise and fall from their perches in the canopy. They despise the unnatural silence Valerius has imposed on their home. If you can win their favor, they might show you a path his sentinels do not watch. How does one win the favor of a talking crow? Finn asked, feeling the conversation slip into the surreal. With a story they have not heard, Ignatius said, a faint smile touching his lips. Or with a shiny trinket. Their morality is fluid, but they respect courage and they delight in chaos. An outsider challenging the Lord of Blackwood is the most interesting thing to happen in those woods in 100 years. Armed with this new, bizarre sliver of hope and a small, silver locket the old monk gave him. They do love silver, he'd said. Finn descended back into the foothills. He stood once more at the edge of the Blackwood, but this time his approach was different. He did not look for a path. He looked for watchers. He moved just inside the tree line, the light dying instantly, the air growing cold and still. He held up the silver locket, letting it catch what little light filtered through the tangled canopy. I seek an audience with the Koriks, he called out, his voice sounding too loud in the oppressive silence. I bring a story and a gift. I come to challenge the silence. For a long time, nothing happened. Then a single black feather drifted down, landing at his feet. A moment later, a large, jet-black crow landed on a branch just above him. Its eyes were not the blank, beady eyes of a bird, but held a sharp, ancient intelligence. It tilted its head, studying him, the locket, and then him again. "Challenge the silence, little man." The crow cawed, its voice a rough, grating sound. "Many have tried. Their bones fertilized the moss." Finn's heart hammered against his ribs. He held the locket higher. "I seek the keeper of the first tear." The crow let out a sound that was half caw, half laugh. "The old blood in the stone cage. You are too late. The Lord drinks his fill. She fades. Then I will remind her how to burn," Finn said, the words coming out with a conviction he didn't fully feel. The crow was silent for a moment. Then it flapped its wings once. "The shiny thing. And the story. If it bores us, we will pluck out your eyes and leave you for the things that crawl." Finn took a deep breath. He had their attention. Now he had to keep it. The fate of the woman who had been his teacher, his family, hung in the balance, depending on his ability to tell a good story, to a murder of cynical, magical crows. The silence after Valerius's furious departure was different. It was a live wire, humming with the energy of her small, dangerous victory. The bruise on her cheek was a purple-black blossom of pain, but it was also a trophy. She had touched him. She had made the ancient, untouchable lord feel something as base and human as rage. In the days that followed, Kale's taunts became less frequent, his glances more thoughtful. The seed of discord she had planted was taking root, but it was a fragile thing. She needed more. She needed a key. Her conversations with Silas, the whisper in the wall, became her sole sustenance. They were conducted in fragments. In the dead hours, when the torches were at their lowest ebb, their voices no louder than the scuttling of insects. "He keeps you alive out of sentiment," Elara asked one night, her lips almost touching the cold, damp stone. A dry, rattling chuckle was the response. "Sentiment? No. He keeps me alive because I am the only one left who knows the flaw in the tier's design, the original sin. Tell me." The blessing was not perfect, Silas's voice hissed. The seers were in a hurry. The eternal night was at the gate. To bind sunlight to a mortal bloodline, it required a sacrifice. A anchor. Elara's breath caught. "What kind of anchor?" "A life," Silas whispered. "A voluntary death. The first guardian, the one who received the tear, had to willingly give their life to ignite the magic in their bloodline. It was a one-time activation, a spark to light the eternal fuse." The pieces began to click into place in Elara's mind, forming a terrifying picture. So for the tear to reach its full power, to truly unmake him, the vessel must die, Silas finished, his tone grimly final. It is the ultimate defense. A final, suicidal blaze of glory that would purge the target. Valerius suspects this, I am sure. It is why he is so careful. He's trying to find a way to extract the power without triggering the sacrifice. He wants to have the sun without the dawn. The weight of this knowledge was a physical pressure on Elara's chest. Her own blood was a loaded weapon pointed at her own heart. To win, she had to die. It was the definition of a Pyrrhic victory. "There is another way," Silas said, as if reading the despair in her silence. "A story my ancestor, the architect, kept secret. A flaw within the flaw." Elara pressed closer to the wall, her heart hammering. "What is it?" "The anchor, the sacrificial death. It does not have to be the vessels." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What are you saying?" "The magic requires a life of the bloodline, but the tear was woven into an entire family. In the absence of a direct descendant, the power can be redirected. It can be fueled by the death of another who carries the same blood, a cousin, a distant relative." A wild, impossible hope flared in Elara's chest. You are of the bloodline." "I am the last son of the architect's brother," Silas confirmed, a strange mix of pride and sorrow in his whisper. "The forgotten branch of the family. Valerius knows I am descended from his enemies, but he does not know how. He thinks my knowledge is academic. He does not know my blood is the key that can unlock the tear without your death." Elara's mind raced. the implications unfolding like a deadly flower. If you die, the tear activates? Fully, yes. A wave of purifying light, focused on the greatest threat in its vicinity, Valerius. It would unmake him, and you would be free, empty of the burden, but alive. It was a path forward. A dark, terrible path, but a path nonetheless. It meant bargaining with a man's life for her own. It meant becoming the architect of a sacrifice. And you would do this? Elara asked, her voice thick with the turmoil of emotions. You would die for a woman you have never seen. For centuries, my family has lived in the shadow of our ancestors' creation, Silas replied, his voice gaining a fierce, determined edge. We have been hunted, forgotten, imprisoned. My life has been a long, slow death in this darkness. To use my last breath to fulfill the tear's true purpose? To finally, strike the blow we were created to strike. That is not a sacrifice, Elara. It is a liberation. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was deadly serious. But there is a condition. You must get me out of this cell. The magic is location-based, tied to the place of the family's original covenant, the castle crypts. You must take me to the crypts. Only there can my death have meaning. The practicality of it was staggering. She was a prisoner in a stone cell. He was a voice in a wall. How could they possibly achieve such a thing? The locks, Silas said, as if sensing her doubt. They are old, older than Valerius. They are physical, but they are also magical. Morana, she is the key in more ways than one. She has a ring, a silver ring with a black stone. It negates the lesser wards. It can open my door, and yours. Morana, the dispassionate scientist. How could they possibly get her ring? Patience, Silas whispered, and pressure. You have already begun to shake the tree. Keep shaking it. The fruit will fall. The next time Morana came for her, the dynamic had shifted. Elara no longer saw just a cold-eyed torturer. She saw a woman with a ring, a key. As Morana prepared her instruments, Elara spoke, her voice calm. He struck me. Morana did not look up from a vial she was filling. I observed the contusion, an emotional response. Unusual. He is losing his objectivity. Elara pressed. Because of me. Because of what I represent. What happens when his obsession overcomes his reason? What happens to you, the voice of science, when the Lord you serve descends into madness? Morana's hand stilled for a fraction of a second. It was the only sign that the words had landed. My work is my concern, she said coolly, but the lack of a sharper rebuttal was telling. The work is everything to you, isn't it? Elara said, lying back on the cold slab. The purity of the search. But you are searching for a ghost in a machine that is breaking down. And when it breaks, what will become of all your fascinating data? She looked directly at Morana's hand, at the silver ring with the black stone on her finger. Will it be lost? Like everything else. Morana met her gaze then, and for the first time, Elara saw a flicker of something beyond clinical curiosity in the vampire's eyes. It was the faint, cold spark of self-preservation. She said nothing more, but as the examination proceeded, the air in the room had changed. A new, unspoken variable had been introduced into Morana's calculations. Elara had found the key. Now, she had to find the courage to turn it. A new, insidious rhythm began in the bowels of Blackwood Keep. Valerius's nocturnal visits took on a different tenor. There was a fresh, feverish intensity in his amber eyes, a barely contained triumph that made Elara's skin crawl worse than the cold touch of his hands. "Can you feel it, Elara?" he whispered one night, his lips close to her ear as he drank. "The harmony, your essence, it is beginning to sing in tune with my own." She felt it too. Not a song, but a violation. Each time he fed, a strange, foreign warmth would briefly flare in her veins after the initial chill, an echo of his power, a residue left behind. He was not just taking, he was exchanging, imprinting himself upon the sacred poison in her blood. Then came the day the world turned upside down. It was during one of Morana's examinations. The vampire was meticulously noting the increased silvery luminescence in Elara's blood under her crystal lens when a commotion echoed from the main dungeon corridor. Sharp, commanding voices, the clang of metal, and Kale's distinctive, mocking laugh. Morana's head snapped up, her clinical focus broken. She moved to the door of the laboratory, peering out into the gloom. Elara, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, strained to hear, caught him skulking in the lower passages. Kale's voice was loud, gloating. Thought he could use the old drainage culvert. A mouse, come to rescue the trapped bird. A second, colder voice cut in, Lysander. The master will be intrigued. A moment later, two vampire guards dragged a struggling figure past the open doorway. He was battered, his clothes torn and muddy, but his face, for one horrifying second, was turned towards the light. Finn. Elara's breath froze in her lungs. Her heart didn't just stop, it shattered. The sight of him, her boy, her brave, foolish Finn, here in this pit of despair, was a wound deeper than any thong or needle. His eyes, wide with defiance and fear, met hers for a fleeting, eternal moment before he was hauled away around the corner. The hope that had been carefully nurtured by Silas's whispers evaporated, replaced by a crushing, maternal terror. She was no longer just fighting for her own freedom or a grand, cosmic victory. She was fighting for his life. Morana turned back from the door, her expression unreadable. She looked from Elara's ashen, stricken face to the doorway, and a single, elegant eyebrow rose in calculation. She said nothing, but the knowledge hung in the air between them. The game had just become infinitely more complicated. That night, Valerius did not come to her cell. He came to Finn's. He had the young hunter thrown into the cell directly opposite hers, the iron bars providing a perfect, cruel view. Finn was chained to the wall, his head lolling. He was alive, but barely. Valerius stood between them, a conductor before his ruined orchestra. He did not look at Elara. His gaze was fixed on Finn. A child, come to save his mother. Valerius mused, his voice echoing in the stone vault. It would be touching, if it were not so pathetically predictable. Finn lifted his head, spitting a glob of blood onto the straw. Go to hell. I have already built my own, thank you. Valerius replied smoothly. Then he turned, his eyes finally finding Elara's through the bars, and he smiled. It was the most terrifying expression she had ever seen on his face. Pure, unadulterated triumph. The bond is complete, Elara, he declared, his voice ringing with power. Your blood has shown me all its secrets, and it has given me a gift. He walked to the foot of the stairs that led up to the main keep. A sliver of gray, pre-dawn light filtered down from above. It was the time when all vampires should be retreating to their coffins, vulnerable, powerless. Valerius paused at the edge of the light. He took a breath, as if savoring the air, and then, with a deliberate, unhurried step, he placed his boot into the beam of nascent daylight. There was no sizzle of flesh, no scream of agony. He stood there, bathed in the weak, gray light, and spread his arms. Behold, he whispered, though it echoed like a thunderclap. The Lord of Blackwood is no longer a creature of the night. Elara felt the last vestiges of hope drained from her body. The final barrier had fallen. He had metabolized the sun's first tear. He had daywalked. He was now truly nearly a god. He turned his gaze back to Finn. Your arrival is a fortunate coincidence. I was in need of a control subject to test the limits of my new resilience. He gestured to Kale. Ensure our guest is presentable for tomorrow's experiments. As Valerius ascended the stairs into the dawn, leaving a silence more profound than any that had come before, Elara locked eyes with Finn across the corridor. His face was a mask of despair and fury. Hers, she knew, was a mirror of the same. The plan with Silas was no longer just about her freedom or killing a monster. It was a race against time, a race to save Finn from a fate worse than death, and to stop a vampire who had just conquered the sun. The stakes had been raised to unimaginable heights, and the cost of failure was now a price she could not bear to pay. The dungeon became a pressure cooker, the air thick with dread and the metallic scent of Finn's blood from the experiments Kale delighted in conducting. Each cry from the opposite cell was a shard of glass in Elara's soul. Valerius's victory was a shroud over them all, his brief, daytime appearances a terrifying reminder of his newfound invincibility. It was Morana who provided the first crack in the dam of despair. She came for Elara not for an examination, but alone, her movements uncharacteristically swift and silent. She stood outside the cell, her clinical gaze darting down the corridor before settling on Elara. "The Lord's methods are becoming unscientific," she stated, her voice low and devoid of its usual dry calm. Emotion clouds data. The boy's suffering provides no new insight, only noise, and his progress. She hesitated, a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. "He no longer consults my findings. He believes he has transcended them." Elara, who had been hunched in her corner, slowly lifted her head. This was it. The fruit Silas had promised was beginning to tremble on the branch. "He is losing control," Elara said, voicing Morana's own unspoken fear. "And when a being of that power loses control, he doesn't stumble. He explodes. Everything he's built, including your laboratory, will be ash, and you with it." Morana's jaw tightened. She looked at her own hands, at the silver ring with the black stone. "My work must be preserved." "Then help me stop him," Elara whispered, the words a lethal gamble. A long, tense silence stretched between them, broken only by Finn's ragged breathing from across the hall. Finally, Morana gave a single, sharp nod. "The one you speak to. Silas. His blood is the true catalyst." "Yes, his death in the crypts will trigger the tears failsafe," Morana reasoned, her mind already working through the variables. "A purging wave. It is an elegant solution, a definitive result." She looked at Elara, a pact sealed in cold, mutual necessity. "I will provide a distraction. And the key. Do not fail. The data must be conclusive." The plan was set for the next feeding cycle. As Valerius descended into the dungeon, Morana was waiting for him, her posture rigid. "My lord, the spectral analysis of the boy's blood shows an anomalous reaction to the residual tear energy in your system. It requires your immediate attention." Her lie was delivered with perfect, clinical precision. Valerius's eyes, burning with arrogant light, narrowed. "Now, it is unstable. It could degrade your newfound attributes." With a flicker of annoyance, he turned from Elara's cell and followed Morana towards the laboratory. It was the window they needed. As their footsteps faded, a soft clink sounded by Elara's door. Morana had dropped the silver ring. With fumbling, desperate fingers, Elara reached through the bars, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her fingertips brushed against the cold metal. She grabbed it. At that moment, chaos erupted from the direction of Finn's cell. Kale, bored and restless, had decided to entertain himself with the prisoner. But Finn, fueled by pain and a desperate need to protect Elara, fought back. He slammed his head into Kale's face, and the two of them crashed against the bars in a furious, grunting struggle. Lysander appeared, moving to intervene, his voice a cold command. "Kale, cease this idiocy." The distraction was perfect. Elara, her hands shaking, slid the black stone of the ring against the lock of her cell. There was a soft click, and a faint, blue magical rune on the door fizzled and died. The door swung open silently. Freedom. After all these weeks, the simple act of stepping beyond the iron bars was a dizzying, overwhelming sensation. But there was no time to savor it. She moved to Silas's cell, hidden in a deeper, darker alcove. The ring worked again. The door creaked open. The figure that emerged from the shadows was a shock. Silas was not just old. He was ancient, a wraith-like man with long, white hair and eyes that held the weariness of ages. He was frail, leaning heavily on the wall, but his gaze was sharp and resolute. "The crypts," he rasped. Quickly, they moved as one, a spectral old man and a battered hunter, slipping through the shadows of the dungeon. They passed the cell where Finn and Kale were still locked in their desperate fight, with Lysander trying to pull them apart. It was Kale who saw them first. His eyes widened in shock, then fury. "The prisoner. She's loose." He abandoned his fight with Finn, shoving Lysander aside and lunging into the corridor, blocking their path to the stairs that led downward to the crypts. His fangs were bared, his face a mask of predatory glee. "Going somewhere, old woman?" Elara stood her ground, pushing Silas behind her. This was it, the final barrier. She had no weapon, no strength left, but she had something else. She had a promise to keep to a dead man and a life to save. She looked at Cale, at the vampire who had tormented her, and then past him to Finn, who was staring at her from his cell, his face a mixture of terror and wild hope. The breaking point had been reached. The shattering was now. The world narrowed to the stone corridor, the snarling vampire, and the frail hope shielding Elara's back. Cale's grin was a rictus of triumph, his body coiled to spring. There was no time for thought, only for the raw instinct that had kept Elara alive for 68 years. As Cale lunged, a silver flash cut through the gloom. Finn, with a desperate roar, had reached through the bars of his cell and grabbed the hilt of a dagger sheathed at Cale's hip. He wrenched it free and slashed it across the back of Cale's leg. Cale screamed a raw, shock sound of pain as the blessed silver seared his flesh. He stumbled, his charge broken. It was the opening Elara needed. She didn't fight him. She sidestepped his faltering lunge and, with every ounce of her remaining strength, shoved the stunned vampire forward, directly into the path of the advancing Lysander. The two vampires collided in a tangle of limbs and snarls. "Go," Finn yelled, his voice cracking. "Now, Elara." She didn't look back. Grabbing Silas's arm, she half-dragged, half-carried him down the narrow, descending staircase that led to the ancient crypts. The air grew colder, older, smelling of deep earth and profound silence. Behind them, the sounds of the struggle faded, replaced by the frantic, rising fury of Valerius's voice echoing from the dungeon above. He had discovered their escape. The crypt was a vast, circular chamber, the final resting place of Valerius's mortal ancestors. Stone sarcophagi lined the walls, their features worn smooth by time. In the center of the room was a simple, unadorned dais. "This is the place," Silas wheezed, pulling away from her. His eyes were bright, feverish with purpose. "The original covenant was made here. The stone remembers." Footsteps, slow and deliberate, sounded on the stairs. Valerius appeared in the archway, his form blotting out the torchlight from above. He was not running. He was stalking. His fury was a cold, palpable force that made the very air tremble. "You truly are relentless," he said, his voice deceptively soft. He ignored Silas, his burning gaze fixed on Elara. "But this farce ends now. You will return to your cell. The tear will be mine completely. There will be no more defiance." Silas stepped in front of Elara, his frail body a shield. "It was never yours to take, leech. It was always a weapon pointed at your heart." Valerius's eyes flickered to Silas with dismissive contempt. "The forgotten architect. You will be the first to die." "No," Silas said, a strange, serene smile on his lips. He looked at Elara one last time, his eyes holding not fear, but a profound gratitude. "I will be the first to be free." He turned and walked to the central dais. As his foot touched the stone, a faint, silvery light began to emanate from the carvings on the floor, tracing a complex, celestial pattern. Valerius's confidence finally broke. "What is this? What are you doing?" "What my family was always meant to do," Silas declared, his voice gaining a resonant power that filled the crypt. He raised his arms. "I am the spark." He plunged the silver ring, Morana's ring, into his own chest. There was no blood. There was only light. A silent, blinding wave of pure, liquid sunlight erupted from Silas's body. It was not fire, but a cleansing, holy radiance that filled the crypt, scouring the shadows from the corners and illuminating every sarcophagus with the clarity of noon. It was the sun's first tear, finally, fully awakened. Valerius screamed. It was a sound of absolute, primordial agony. The light did not burn him, it unwove him. His form began to dissolve, his flesh turning to smoke, his fine clothes to dust. He clawed at the air, his amber eyes wide with terror and disbelief, as the very essence of his immortality was erased from existence. No, the cry was torn from him, a final, futile protest against the dawn, before he was utterly, completely unmade. Nothing remained but a fading wisp of darkness, soon banished by the relentless light. The wave of power washed over Elara. It was a warmth that sank into her bones, healing the aches, soothing the bruises, erasing the punctures on her neck. She felt the weight of the tear, the ancient burden in her blood, simply vanish. It was gone, its purpose fulfilled. She was empty, but she was whole. She was free. The light faded as quickly as it had come. Silas's body was gone, consumed in the conflagration of his own sacrifice. The crypt was silent once more, but the air was clean. The malevolent presence that had plagued it for centuries finally purged. A soft sound made her turn. Finn stood at the entrance to the crypt, leaning heavily against the wall, his face awestruck. Behind him, Morana watched, her expression one of stunned, clinical fascination. Of Kale and Lysander, there was no sign. Likely fled into the night, their master destroyed. Elara walked to the center of the dais, to the spot where Silas had given everything. She knelt, placing a hand on the warm stone. "Thank you," she whispered to the silence. Finn limped to her side, helping her to her feet. "It's over," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Elara looked around the crypt, then up the stairs, towards the world above. For the first time in a long time, she thought of the sun not as a marker of time spent in a cell, but as a promise. "Yes," she said, taking his arm. "It's over." Together, the old hunter and her apprentice walked up from the darkness and into the light of a new day. Thank you for watching. First of all, the stories we tell are either entirely fictional or inspired by real events. If you have any stories you'd like to share with us, let's chat in the comment section. If you liked our story, we'd appreciate it if you gave our video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on our next videos. You can check out the playlist created for other stories on our channel in the card section at the top right. See you in the next video.